Welcome along, my aspiring allies, and thank you for joining me on this most recent episode of the Speaking of Inclusion podcast. Today, my guest is Phil Willcox, and he is from Emotions at Work Consulting. So, Phil and I had a beautiful conversation today, all about the range of emotions that we can experience and how they manifest and how they kind of show up for us at work, at home, and everywhere. And Phil gave some really great insight and advice around proactive and reactive ways that we can tap into and recognize and manage the emotions and the moods that we are experiencing. I want to call out as well, before I kick off this episode, that the intro conversation that Phil and I had that is not recorded and shared was quite a deep one, where we were both quite vulnerable about things that were going on in our lives. So the start of this episode, we both do acknowledge that we're a bit flat and we weren't quite sure how to transition from that conversation into the podcast recording. But what we actually decided to do was just own it. So you will hear us starting off by saying, actually, let's just start where we are and talk about emotions from that place of authenticity. So hopefully this works. We're going to find out. You can let me know what you think. But this is true. This is how we record the Speaking of Inclusion podcast. It's real. We don't edit. So the things that we were feeling are the things that we shared with you. So, you know the drill. Without further ado, I would like to introduce to you Phil Willcox on the Speaking of Inclusion podcast. Sit back, relax in whichever way works best for you, and please enjoy. All right.
Okay.
Yeah, now I'm trying to think of a way that we can lift our mood so that we can pull back in. Mind you, I say that. Maybe this is the good way to
Maybe we
start.
don't need to. Yeah.
Yeah, maybe this is a good way to start to actually. So somewhere around about now, I can start clipping, and yeah, maybe this is the way to really kick this off is to acknowledge the fact that we've both come into this conversation feeling a bit flat, feeling
Hmm.
less than on our game, maybe is a nice way to put it, and
Yeah.
reflective, perhaps is another thing that I'm thinking. So given that, your zone of genius really is talking all around emotions at work, I guess this is it, isn't it? We are at work and these are the emotions we're experiencing. So what do we do with them, Phil?
Um, so I went out for a walk before we came together. So I made sure that I'd sort of blocked out the half an hour before we
Mm.
started because I knew that was going to help me. I knew that was going to, that kind of um, doing something proactively to help with how you feel, how you're feeling is important. So there's a couple of things that I think um, like that I'm doing, that I know I'm doing, and I'm doing deliberately because I know they're helpful. So one thing is reminding myself that there is a difference between an emotion and a mood. Now there's a spectrum, and on that spectrum there's also other elements, but I'm going to stick on emotions and moods. So emotions and moods are different. So emotions last sort of minutes and seconds, whereas moods can last kind of minutes and hours. So mood is like a sense of feeling that you can have where you just feel a bit like, I don't know, grumpy or um melancholic or blue, or or sad, or maybe it's sad. You're using sad to describe like a more of a mood than it is a particular kind of discrete emotion. So um I'm experiencing lots of different emotions, sometimes together, sometimes in sequence, um, and sometimes um, they're to do with me. Sometimes they're to do with stuff that's going on around me. Sometimes they're to do with stuff that I'm remembering. So emotions, I think. So we use like the term emotion, but there's so many different elements to it. So what do I mean by that? So emotions can happen or can occur as a result of things happening around us. So I hear that I hear a story that you tell me, and then that I may then feel an emotion in response to that story. So there might be something in your story in particular that resonates with me, connects with me in some way, and then I feel something. Also, though, I might remember something. So I might remember something that's happened or happening to me, and then when I remember that thing, I then go, oh yeah, and then I feel that feeling again, if that makes sense. So one of the things that I'm really frustrated by at the moment is the market. So in terms of the consultancy, facilitation, coaching market, that market is really frustrating me at the minute, and I can do nothing about it. Right? There's nothing I could do to control the state of the market. And when I think about it, I then get frustrated, and then I remember how annoyed I am about the state of the market, and then that can bring that frustration sort of back to me again. So emotions can come from things that we experience around us. They can also come from things that we think and things that we remember. And also, emotions can come from things that we imagine. So if I think about my frustration with where the market is, I can then easily imagine the cataclysmic failure of my organization as a result of the market. What that would mean for my livelihood, what that would mean for my family, what that would mean for my reputation, what that would mean for all of those things. None of those things are actually happening, but I'm imagining what all of those things would feel like. And then with those, I am a mixture of angry and sad and really determined to not let those things happen. And I would put determination and anger in the same family of emotions, but that's something else we can come back to later on. So I feel like at the minute I am maybe not every minute of every day, but I am consistently feeling quite strong emotions and a mixture of those and in different ways.
And if I may ask,
Yeah, go on.
is the experience that we have on that then? Because I think I find that really super interesting. And what's kind of floating into my mind is that because we're kind of processing things cognitively, and like you say, we're having those thoughts about I can imagine all the ramifications of what this could mean. And is that then that our bodies and our physiological responses don't know that it's not actually happening? You know, we're sort of thinking it and processing it, and that actually within us we don't know it's not real. So that's why we start feeling all of those things. Like the fear of it being real is real, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, yeah. So the um so if we were to go with a method or a model that's called the basic emotion theory, which is that emotions are a combination of evolutionary experiences that we've had both individually as people and as a species, and then our bodies have the the psychophysiological combination of things has learnt that when we're experiencing whatever the stimulus may be, whether that be remembering something, imagining something, thinking something, or experiencing something around us, when our when our minds or our brains go, oh, that's that emotion, then the body goes, okay, well, you need these things then. And there's some really good research, and I can send you some links to some papers for the show notes if you want, around the physiological changes that happen with different emotions. Whether it be in anger or in fear, as an example, in both, blood pressure can increase, pulse rate can increase. But what can be different is in anger, predominantly, the blood is pumped to your arms and your hands. Whereas in fear, the blood is pumped to your legs because they're your best method of escape, and then to your arms and your hands is because they're your best weapon. So I can't say that the universally for every single person every time, because that wouldn't be quite true to say, but certainly in the majority of cases, that's where the blood would tend to go. So both of them, you feel an increase in respiration, an increase in blood pressure, increase in your pulse rate, and your breath increases because your body needs more oxygen to fuel the blood that's being pumped around your body. But I can't do anything with my hands and the market. You know, the
Yeah.
blood rushing to my arms and my hands can't help me with the state of the market. But I still have that energy. I still have that energy that's being created by those changes and the adrenaline that's being released by my body to say, well, you need this then to prepare you. So you need that adrenaline because you're angry about something. Adrenaline is a great way to energize the body. So I'll give you more of the adrenaline to help you with that. That still has to go somewhere. And so my decision to go for a walk before we got together was me doing proactive emotion regulation. That was me going, right, I know that my body is full of energy right now. I know it's full of these different feelings that I've got, these different chemicals that I've got. I can feel, if I was to look at the heart monitor on my watch, I would wager that my resting heart rate is a few beats higher than it typically would be. That's because my body's doing what it needs to do. So I need to do what I need to do what I need to do to help my body help me be as well as I can be for the environment that I'm in. Now, if you and I weren't recording a podcast, if we were chatting, I probably wouldn't have bothered going for a walk because we could just chat. But actually, I wanted to make sure that I was in as constructive a place as I could be. So the walk, therefore, was a helpful, proactive way of me managing that. And yes, there are reactive things I can do as well. And if we want to, we can talk about. So if there are what I call the 5 families of emotion regulation. So we can talk about those if we want to.
Yeah.
And some of those are proactive and some of those are reactive. So I chose a proactive one, which is right. I'm going to get myself in the best possible state I can be. I'm going to have a peppermint tea, which I've just finished. I'm going to have a glass of water because that's going to help me. And I'm going to go for a walk. And I'm going to stand up because if I sit down, more likely my energy is going to be kind of constrained because I've got to sit. Whereas if I stand, I've got a bit more flexibility with what I can do. So therefore, all of those things I've done in a way to help me regulate the emotions that I'm feeling.
Fascinating. Thank you so much for sharing that. And isn't that interesting as you were talking there about like the way our very, very clever bodies know where to send blood for our best, basically our best efforts of survival, isn't it? Like,
Yeah.
am I going to need to fight? Am I going to need to run away? Like, what is it I'm experiencing, and how am I the most ready for that?
Mm.
And then that makes sense about trying to do something proactive to disperse that energy. To would that then act in the way of almost signaling to our bodies that we're safe? Like we've dispersed that energy, therefore it has been used as however needed, and we're good again.
Yeah, definitely. So um, the body's so smart. And what it's also um, constantly trying to do is achieve a thing called homeostasis, which if you were in more of a if you were more of a Buddhist kind of view, that might be called being Zen. Others might call it being calm. So it's trying to get the body back to a place of equilibrium. And sometimes people talk about the nervous system as though there is a single nervous system. Some people, most scientists would agree there's 2 variations of the nervous system. There's the sympathetic nervous system, and then there's the parasympathetic nervous system. And one of them is associated. Most people use the fight and flight definition to say, right, that's the one that you activate when you need something, when you need the energy to go somewhere, and then the other is called rest and digest, which is the one that you need that helps you calm down. It helps you be still. It helps you digest your food because when as an example, I know it's a bit crude and it might be a bit like disgusting maybe for some people,
I think we're
but
here for it.
well, so there's a reason why people use the phrase they shit themselves or they wet themselves because when your body is that in that much of a need, or where the emotion is that intense, the body can say, I don't need those things right now. Those things aren't going to help me, so I'm going to expel them from me to give me every chance I need to get to wherever it is that I need to get to. So I need all of the best resources I can have. Urine and feces don't help me, so I'm going to get rid of those things. And it completely shuts off your gastrointestinal tract. And that's why in fear, often people's mouths get dry, why they find it difficult to speak, because your body's gone, you don't need that right now. You don't need to rest and digest right now. What
Yeah.
you need is air. You don't need all of that intestinal stuff. So I'm going to shut all of that off because you don't need it. Because what you need is air coming in to pump and fuel your muscles so that you can go and do what you need to do. And so what we can also do then as people is we can use that if we know that, and then there's things that we can do to play to those different nervous systems and make best use of them. So for example, I've talked about respiration and breathing. So anybody that's interested in kind of mindfulness practice or meditative practices will know the power of breath work. And part of the reason that breath work can be so crucial to how we regulate emotions is because how we breathe can tell our bodies how we feel. So if I'm angry or I'm anxious or I'm scared or if I'm offended, and even if I'm happy, my breathing will be different to what it would be if I was calm and I was in a state of homeostasis. If I was in homeostasis where I wasn't emotionally charged in any way, my breathing would be different to what it would be if I've got an emotion happening. So by regulating your breathing, that can tell your body everything's okay.
Right.
So that whether some people might call it box breathing, some people might call it deep breathing. There's different types of breath work that you can do. But breathwork can be really helpful from an emotion point of view because it just tells your body everything's okay. It's all right.
Mm.
I can regulate and control my breathing in such a way that tells my body calm down, everything is okay. So
Yeah.
you can use it kind of to your advantage as well. So you can tell your body everything's okay, which helps tell your mind that everything's okay.
Excellent. And then it kickstarts that process of calming everything back down again for you. And isn't that interesting? And I wonder if there's like anyone else like me who's listening right now that as you were talking about breathing, I found myself getting really conscious and aware of how am I breathing? And I found
Yeah.
myself breathing really deeply, really slowly, being like, yes, I'm very calm.
And I can feel that I'm not right. I can feel
Yeah.
even I can't remember. Do people see this podcast or they just hear it?
It's a video as well, so yeah, if you
Okay, so
yeah.
what they'll notice then is there's times where I step away from the mic, and when
Yeah.
I'm doing that, it's because I'm trying to take a deep breath because I know that both in terms of the excitement that I'm feeling, but I'm also reliving the emotions that we're
Mm.
describing. And so when I'm taking a step back from the mic, because I don't want the audience, not because
Yeah.
I'm embarrassed by it, but just because it's not nice to hear. It's not the nicest
Yeah.
thing to hear somebody doing a deep breath through a microphone.
And does that
Um,
fall under that camp of like, is it misophonia when people with food sounds and stuff, it's a bit triggering
yes,
for them. Yeah,
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 yeah. So there you go. So for those of you that are watching on YouTube, you will see Phil demonstrating what he's been doing,
yeah.
and if you're listening along, he's just given an excellent audio description of what he's doing. So yeah, and isn't that interesting? And even knowing that you are tuned in enough to how you're feeling when you're thinking and you're conscious of your breathing, you're like actually you're thinking about the listeners as well as to what's the impact of this
Mm,
and how is this coming across? So you're almost acutely aware of your surroundings as much as you are of what's going on for you as well.
mm. I
Yeah,
try to be as best I can. Yeah. Not
yeah,
always easy when emotions are at play.
yeah.
And yeah.
I know that there's certainly times that when I've been on stages speaking and I've got a handheld mic and I've got it quite close to my face because it's as yours is actually it's
Mm.
not a it's a is it a directional mic? That's the right term, isn't it?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
and I'm conscious that my heart's going crazy, and there I go down the mic, and it's just like you can hear it coming out the speakers, and you think, no, nobody wants to hear
Uh, no,
that.
nobody wants to hear that. Definitely not.
So you mentioned there about there being five families. So can we go back and just
Yeah,
what are
absolutely.
those? What are we talking about there?
Um, so of those five, then I put them into two sort of different varieties or categories, maybe, and they are proactive and reactive. So proactive, there are two, and in reactive there are three. So within proactive, they're the sort of the titles of each one. One is about situation selection, and the other one is situation modification. So the reason that I describe these as proactive is because these need, or in the main, these are best used ahead of situations where emotions are going to be at play. So if you're going into a situation where emotions are going to be at play, let's think about you talked about speaking, that could be one.
Mm,
It could be there's a meeting you're going into that you're nervous of. It could be a conversation that you're looking to have with somebody about what potentially could be a difficult or a sensitive topic, and you know that you're going to be feeling feelings. Um, and so these two families work well. So situation selection is a bit more sort of black and white maybe because it's like an in or an out. So it's in my example, one of the things I could have done today is I could have contacted you earlier on and said, you know what, Katie, I'm just not emotionally, I'm really charged today. I've got loads of emotions going on. I've got loads of thoughts in my head. Um, I'm not sure I'm in the right place to do the recording. Could we postpone it and delay it for another day? And that would be situation selection. That's me saying, you know what? I can't
mm,
regulate. I don't feel like I can regulate my emotions well enough to put me into this situation. So can I not be in it, please? And so And some people will do that, and sometimes when this does happen in the moment, you might experience this as people leaving a situation. So I've had it before where I've been in meetings with teams, or I've been in discussions with somebody, and somebody say, you know what, I just can't do this right now, and they'll literally get up and leave. And that situation selection in action, in terms of saying, you know what, this is too much, and I know that if I stay here, I'm going to find it really difficult to regulate how I'm feeling, so I'm just going to get myself out of this because I can. The other way of looking at situation selection is, how do I select in to situations that I know are going to help me? So, as an example, I went for my walk 30 minutes before we got together because I knew that by choosing to do that, it was going to help me regulate my emotions. So, if you've got that difficult conversation coming up, as an example, how are you making sure that for that hour before you go into that discussion, I picked an hour because that's how most people chuck up their day, but let's say an hour. So, the hour before you go into that discussion, what are you doing in that hour to help make sure that you are as ready as possible in your best place possible emotionally to go into that discussion or into that conversation? Or another one, for me in particular, is, I know that if I don't exercise frequently, I struggle to regulate my emotions more, because exercise is a really good way of me getting it out of my system, either because it's the physical action of expelling the energy, or it's because it's where I think. So if I go for a nice long run, I do lots of thinking while I'm running, and it
Mhm.
just helps me kind of process stuff and just get out of my head. Um, and when I'm really busy, often I would deprioritize those things for
Yeah.
other tasks. But actually, that doesn't help me in the long run. I can probably get away with it for a week, maybe two, but any more than that, and I start to become what my wife tells me off for being, which is grumpy daddy. She's like, "Come on, just
Yeah.
will you go for a run, or will you go for a swim, please? Because
Yeah.
you're just like, your temper's short, you're snappy, whatever that may be." So situation selection is both kind of selecting into situations and also selecting out of situations. So it's selecting into ones that you know are going to be helpful. So are there people that you work with who build you up? Are there
Mhm.
people that you know that when you're with them, you're like, they are just good people to be around? So if you're finding things tough, go seek them out, because they will help you. Not because they're going to do anything, but just being in their presence will help you
Mhm.
because you know that they build you up. And similarly, is you might want to then select out of situations. Now, it might be that you can't do that. And that's where situation modification comes in. So, and maybe not that you can't. So it could be that you physically can't, but it could also be that you don't want to because of different expectations. So I was doing some work once with an FD, and she really struggled presenting. It was something she
Mhm.
felt deeply uncomfortable doing. But as the FD, she couldn't not present. She had to,
Yeah.
as part of her role. So what we then were thinking about was, well, how do we change? How do we modify the situations where you have to present to your peers or present to the board? How do we modify that situation so that it becomes much more comfortable for you or easier for you to regulate how you feel in that?
Yeah.
So through the coaching relationship we had, what it really came down to was two different things. One, she really struggled with unexpected questions. So if there was a question that came in that she hadn't prepared for or wasn't aware of or didn't have time to think about, she sort of thinking on her feet, she found really difficult. And then the second thing that she found really difficult was being stood up when everybody else was sat down. And we're like, okay, well, those are things that we can work with. We can work with that. So we changed it that instead of when she presented, now there was a bit of a challenge in terms of environmentally, how great was this option? Because rather than presenting to a screen, what we decided to do was to print out what she needed to discuss and give them as a handout rather than have a screen. Because if there was a screen, she had to stand up next to the screen
Mhm.
and present in that way. So instead, we printed everything out and everything went as handouts that people then had in front of them that they would turn through as they were going. And the second thing was, before she began, she said, right, just to let you know, there's a lot of information in my update today. And what I want to make sure I do is respect your time and respect your understanding of the data. So what I'd like you to do is, if you've got some questions, just write it down on the page that we're talking about. So you've all got a page in front of you. Grab yourself a pen, write your question on that page, and hold it until we get to the end, because there's a likelihood that either I'll answer the question later on in the presentation, or uh, we can come back to it and look at it another time. So write your questions on the piece of paper, and then we'll do it. And then when she got to the end, she would then go, right, page one, questions. None. Okay, great. Page two. Or, well, what's the first page someone's got questions on? Oh, page three, right? Let's go to
Mhm.
there. So then she knew what the question was related to.
Yeah.
So in her mind, she knew what the frame of reference was to the question that she was getting. And then like any of the catch-all questions she would capture at the end. But that format just helped ease a lot of the pressure, because the pressure was, I mean, I don't know if the pressure was coming from anyone else in the room, but it was certainly a self-induced pressure in terms of how she was
Mhm.
concerned about how she was coming across and how she was performing. So by making those two changes, just helped her ease into those presentations much, much more.
I think that's fascinating to hear. Thank you for sharing that, both of those examples actually. It's really useful. And isn't that interesting in that the ways in which we can create those small elements of control, the small frameworks or ways that we can position up front how we need if I think about it for the coaches that listen as well, they'll be familiar with this. It's like contracting, isn't it, with the people that you're
Yeah.
presenting to for here's how I need you to be while I'm doing this thing. And actually that's also a really inclusive way of delivering your presentation if I think about it for the speakers who are listening, because you're telling your audience what you expect of them in advance, which for some people I certainly know from a neurodivergence perspective, if you're giving clear instruction about we're going to wait and hold questions till the end, that's brilliant because people know what they're doing. They know where to write it. They know how the question process is going to unfold. So it's not just helpful for her in her presentation, but it's helpful for the audience for their frames of reference as to how to ask questions. So I think that's some quite genius advice there. I think there's some great nuggets that we could take away from that. And for anyone that was watching this as well on YouTube, I was nodding along when you were talking about the gym because that resonated with me massively in that my routine is so important to me. And if I don't get enough sleep or if I'm not getting enough exercise, I do come apart at the seams a lot quicker than if
Mm,
I am. My resilience is certainly impacted. And exactly as you were saying, the first thing that I cop out of is my gym routine. It's like, oh, I just won't go this morning. I'll get up early. I'll do more work. I'll do this thing. And that's the first thing I sacrifice. And I have to be really strict with myself and not do that because the impact, like the cumulative impact of me skipping a couple of days at the gym, it really messes with my head.
yeah.
Yeah. And for
Yeah.
anyone listening who's coping with menopause symptoms as well, like that just compounds it as well. If we're not getting enough sleep and exercise, I'm a nightmare, quite frankly.
No, definitely. And I think sleep is often is another one that people will compromise on. So me, I'm guilty of it as well. So when I say guilty of it, that's the wrong frame. It's a habit that I can get into. So when I was studying most recently, I would often pull like sort of work until 3 o'clock in the morning to get an assignment done and in. Partly because you know, if I don't have a deadline on something, it doesn't get done. So I need a deadline for something to happen, and also I do my best work actually when there's a deadline. So I know I work really well, and I can create some great stuff when I've got a deadline to work to. And I can sacrifice sleep in the short term, but I can't do it in the long term. So if I sacrifice sleep, then I get to my ability to regulate my emotions diminishes. Um, and sometimes there can be like a bit of um, a cycle of, or not a cycle, that's the wrong word, a system of behaviors in terms of I sleep poorly, so I'm therefore more tired, so I eat less healthily, which then gives my body less of the nutrients that it actually needs, which means then I sleep less well because my body hasn't got what it needs to help me do it, or I drink alcohol, or
Mhm.
or other things because I'm tired, and then I don't sleep as well, and then the interplay of those different things just make it much much more difficult for me to to regulate those emotions that I'm feeling, because my tolerance and my threshold to be able to do it is much reduced.
Mm. Yeah, absolutely. And I can imagine that must resonate with a lot of people listening to this because I mean this is why things like burnout and things are so common,
Mm,
isn't it? In the who is it that we actually abuse more than anyone? And it is ourselves, isn't it? We sacrifice and cut corners in taking care of ourselves. And I absolutely know I've been a horror sometimes to some people. I think of one, and if we talk about a work context,
Mm.
we can't isolate it, can we? We can't like just turn it on and be fantastic at work or fantastic at home and not in the other. Like
Yep.
we are depleted in our resilience in this way consistently. Um, and I know that there are times where I've been too tired, too short fused, and I've snapped at people. Not snapped kind of physically, but snapped at people. And yeah, and it's awful. It's an awful feeling, isn't it? Because you know that you feel bad instantly, like, "Oh, I shouldn't have said that. I shouldn't have done that.
Yeah.
That's terrible." And then you're kind of backpedaling, and then you feel worse, and then you don't sleep because then you're thinking about the thing that you did, and it just accumulates even more, doesn't it?
Yep. Exactly. And that's a wonderful example of you then relive that. You just relive it and relive it and relive it. So, um, you know, one of the things that we talk about a lot at home. So my wife and I have got three children, um, and I know I talk about emotion at work, and that's my specialism. And at the same time, you're exactly right in that the amount of bandwidth or energy or resilience that you have isn't defined by the context that you're in. And so, for me, in my example, I was asking my son to do something. I'd asked him to do it once, twice, and then a third time. And I can't remember what he'd done. It was near bedtime. I wanted him to go to bed, and we were looking for something. Can't remember what we were looking for. Um, and he'd opened the door to the utility room, which is where the cat sleeps. And he came in to try and help me find whatever it was we were looking for. And then when he left the door open, and the cat went out, and I went, "Oh, idiot." And Joseph, my son, said, "I can hear you." And I was like, "Oh, shit.
Mm,
Shit, 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 shit." Like that that isn't the dad that I
yeah.
am or want to be. But I was all of the things. Tired, frustrated. I was frustrated that we'd lost the thing that we were trying to find. I was frustrated at him for not going to bed. I was frustrated that I then have to go and not chase the cat around because he's too old to be properly chased, but to round the cat up and put the cat back to bed again. I was frustrated because I was tired and I wanted to go to bed. Um, and I wasn't able to hold that statement in, and then I didn't sleep very well because I just felt terrible. And I apologized to him, apologized to him at the time. I apologized to him again before I put him to sleep. Um, and my sleep was interrupted because I was both kind of unpacking how did I get to that point then? How did I get to the point where I decided to call my son an idiot? Um, and um, and then feeling guilty about the fact that I'd done it, feeling ashamed about the fact not guilty. I was ashamed, feeling ashamed about the fact that I'd done it. And I was still beating myself up for it the next day and the day after that, I think. And then it was only when I apologized to him, I think, the third day afterwards. And he was like, "Dad, it really is okay." And I was like, "Okay then." And then I forgave myself, and then I allowed myself to move
Yeah.
on. Um,
But
but
I
yeah.
think that is, and thank you for sharing that because I think that's going to resonate with practically everybody because I'm sure we've all had those moments where we have ruminated on something way past any point where it is even useful to us. Is it?
Mm,
There's that moment where we accept the thing that we did, like we could have done better or we could have done differently. And that's the point then to to acknowledge that and put it down. And we just don't. We carry it with us, don't we?
mm,
And I find that a lot in workshops, especially, when we're talking about some of the more difficult and challenging topics that come up in diversity and inclusion. And one of the things I always talk about in contracting is, please be as kind to yourself as you would like to be to other people, because we've all been that person where we've asked the question or said the thing where as soon as you hear words
mm.
come out your mouth and you're like, oh, that's not how I meant it, or that's
Yeah.
that's not what I wanted to say, or and then we spend the next 10 minutes thinking about that, or the next 10 days thinking about that, not about, how are we going to move past it? How am I going to learn? What am I going to do differently? So I think that that is an example that's going to resonate hugely with people. So we've done the proactive thing.
Hmm.
So what are the three reactive things?
So the three reactive things then, and depending, so there's a gentleman by the name of Cliff Lansley, and he's written a few books in and around emotions, and one of the things he talks about is this idea of an emotional timeline, and that in terms of emotions can kind of unfold over time. And so these the different ones that I'm going to describe now sort of occur at different points on the timeline, depending on how early you can become aware of how you're feeling. So
Right.
so the first one I'll talk about is and it's one that a lot of coaches will be familiar with, and some individuals may be familiar with as well, which is the cognitive change or the cognitive reframe, which is where you think about something differently to feel about it differently. So the often cited example is you're a passenger in a vehicle or you're driving a vehicle, another vehicle sort of cuts across you or cuts in front of you or cuts in. Often people may feel the emotion of anger because anger as an emotion is to do with an obstruction to a goal. You had a goal to get somewhere safely. Somebody has put that at risk, or they've obstructed that goal because they're now in your way. And so you could be angry about the obstruction. And so to think about it differently, you might say, "Oh, I hope their poorly friend or relative that's in the car with them gets to the hospital in time." Or oh, that person must have such a crucial task that they need to do that they are willing to drive in that way to get to where they need to get to. So
Yeah.
you think about it differently to feel about it differently. Um, uh, and that's kind of the essence that sits behind it. And and again, sometimes it can be difficult to do that because you might not know how you're feeling as early as possible, or as early in that example as you could do. So yeah, so that's one, which is a cognitive change or reframe, where you think differently to feel differently. Um, Another one then is, or the second one in that kind of timeline, is called attentional deployment. So it's where you focus on something else so that you feel something else. So whereas the other one is think differently to feel differently, this one is focus differently to feel differently. So often that might happen let's say in a meeting. I've seen it happen where we're discussing a particular topic, maybe like poor performance of a team, or poor performance of a business unit or something like that, and it all gets a bit uncomfortable. And then somebody says, "Should we move on?" And then we move on. So we don't address the thing that was there. We don't address the discomfort. We don't discuss the emotion that's happening there and then. What we do is we put our attention somewhere else. Now, another example for those that are viewing, you'll see me pick up my phone. For those that are listening, I've got my phone in my hand. These are attentional deployment devices. So I'm feeling whatever I'm feeling. I don't want to feel that. So I put my focus elsewhere. I pick up my phone and I open something, whatever that
Yeah.
something may be. Could
So
be
the
a,
mindless doom scrolling that we do on social media at night when we know we should just be going to sleep.
and it's often because whatever it is that's keeping us awake, maybe, and it might be that we're just not tired, and it could be that there's something keeping us awake that we're feeling emotions about, and maybe we don't want to address that. We don't want to deal with that there and then. So we go, right, I'm going to focus on something else to take my so I feel something different. So I focus on something else, so I
Mm.
feel something else. Um, at its most destructive, this one can, and I mentioned earlier on alcohol, but other types of dependency can feature here, which is where I don't want to feel what I'm feeling, so I'm going to numb my feelings by feeling something else or focusing on something else. So dependency can be something that might happen here. Similarly, just it can be as small as changing a topic, and it can be as big as or it could be as destructive as some kind of dependency that would go with it. And I'm not trying to say that everybody that's alcohol dependent are using it as a
Mhm.
method of escaping emotion. What I'm saying is that that can happen. So people
Yeah.
can use substances as a way to
Yeah.
detach themselves from what it is that they might be feeling.
Yeah. And now that really resonates, if I may, because as you were saying that, the first thing that came to my mind was, oh, yeah, because when I get really emotional or overwhelmed or have one of those days where I just can't, for whatever reason, I can't do that day. Cooking is my thing. And I will go
Hmm.
out and I will buy all of the ingredients for something, and it will generally involve a lemon meringue because that is usually my go-to savior.
Nice, love that.
Yeah. And I'm good at cooking. I'm gonna toot my own trumpet on that one. I'm bloody good at it. So I will spend hours cooking something and baking something, like just making all of this food. because that I now have just learned is attentional deployment, which is
Yeah,
I don't want to think and face into the way that I'm feeling about this thing. I'm going to absolutely put all of my attention in something else that I love.
absolutely.
Yeah.
And it could be that that's also situation selection at the same time. So it could be that you're doing both because you're saying, you know
Yeah.
what, I know this helps me. I know that baking helps me. It just helps me decompress. All right, I don't process it because I'm not thinking about it. I'm not feeling it. But I know that I will feel better about this after baking or cooking or whatever it is.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
and I think that's where the thing that we're using is if we can become aware that that's what we're doing, we can then think, well, actually, is that a constructive is that activity that I'm doing a constructive one? So is me, I don't know, going and playing on the Xbox for 3 hours, is that a constructive use of that? Because if it is, and and subjectively I feel better as a result afterwards, then okay, great, off I go. But if I don't, if it's just putting off the feelings, then I might go, well, actually, maybe I need to find a different way then. Maybe I need
Mm.
to put my attention into something that can help me more than going and play on the
Yeah.
Xbox for 3 hours or um yeah.
Yeah, because that sounds like someone I used to work with. So shout out to Amy Goodwin if she is listening. That she used to call that squeezing the balloon, which is when you take the problem you've got, and for people listening, you squeeze one end of a balloon and the other end just gets bigger. So at some point, you're going to have to face up to the thing because you've only
Yeah,
deferred the facing into those emotions. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, definitely. And the third and final one then is response modulation. So response modulation, research would suggest, is the most common and the most destructive way of regulating emotion. So it's where in the moment, as that emotion is there, you are modulating you're modulating how you're feeling, and often in the workplace, people will typically suppress, either consciously suppress or subconsciously repress the emotion that they're feeling, and that's like pinching the balloon. In the it's the I might feel something about this particular situation that I'm in, and if I don't say anything about it, if I don't express that emotion, and I just push it back down again, in the moment that can be okay. But if I don't have a way of expressing it at another point in time or in another way, that's when it can get really difficult. And often, I'll talk about what I would describe as, or what a lot of emotion researchers describe as flooding out episodes, which is where emotions come flooding out of us. And they can come flooding out of us in different ways. For some people, that might be coming out in tears. For someone else, that might be coming out in shouting. For someone else, that might be coming out in laughter. Um, you've had. I'm sure you or the listener may have had those moments where somebody's just laughing, and you would think it's inappropriately, and you're like, "What on earth are they laughing about?" But it's just because they can't hold the emotion in anymore, and so their way of letting it flood out is to let it flood out through laughter. Um, and anyway, so when we have those flooding out of emotions, it's where, and for the listeners, then what I'm describing is I'm using my hands to kind of like bring an emotion up to my sort of chin, and then I'm pushing it back down again, and then I'm bringing it up and pushing it back down. And each time I push it back down, it never quite goes back down as far as it did before. So my hands end up moving progressively up towards my mouth, and then all of the emotion comes out of it in some way. And that's what the flooding out episode is typically, is where you've been pushing emotion or emotions down, and then they've got nowhere else to go. And then something happens. Pick your idiom, straw that broke the camel's back, whatever you would prefer, and then everything just comes.
Yeah.
Um, so response modulation is regulating that emotion in the moment, and the risk is if you don't have a way to constructively express it, it can be really harmful, both from a physical health perspective. People that use this method of regulating emotion most often also that also correlates with people that have heart disease and have other physical ailments. Ulcers is another one, and similarly for mental health outcomes as well. So if you don't have a way of expressing those emotions on a day-to-day basis, then it can be. I'm not saying, again, to be clear, it could sound like I'm saying if you don't express your emotions on a day-to-day basis, you will have poor mental health. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is there is a correlation between people that don't express how they feel on a regular basis and poor mental health outcomes.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, correlation rather than causation.
Causation, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. And actually, if I may then kind of shine the inclusion lens over the top of that, is that something that we see in organizations when you don't have a good strategy for making sure that voices are heard. Often it is the most marginalized backgrounds or identities that are those that will be spoken over or excluded or unable to express how they feel about things. And therefore, they are more likely to feel like they don't belong, to feel disgruntled, to feel like they're having to suppress that, and therefore I can imagine that then that could cause a correlation then with absences and things as
Yeah.
well. So there could be data points that people, if from our HR people that might be listening and watching, explore your data points to see if there's any correlation there with the data that you capture and wonder, again, correlation, not causation, but just
Yeah.
wonder, use that as some insight to have a think about how are you creating spaces.
Yeah, exactly. Because if um um so one of the things I've done recently with teams, so I've been doing a lot of work with teams in a construction setting. Um and and typically or culturally what I found and again I'm going to say typically, not universally. So I'm not saying every construction organization or every construction site works in this way. So typically, the most credible emotions that you can express in the construction environments that I've been exposed to, happiness, good to go. Happiness, enjoyment, positivity, all of those things, excellent. Yep, that's good. Anger, yeah, that's okay as well. You can be angry. You can be angry. You can be frustrated. You can probably even get away with hitting a table. You can probably get away with shouting at somebody. Anger is okay. Fear is all right if it's to do with physical safety. So
Mhm.
if it's to do with physical safety, then fear is okay. If it's to do with psychological safety, I would wonder whether fear is as okay. Um, but being offended, being disgusted, being contemptuous, those things, being overwhelmed, all of those things, no, they are much less credible emotions to experience or to express. Sorry, not experience, to express.
Mm.
And so a lot of the work I've been doing is with teams in terms of helping them engage with and express all of those emotions. Now, that might sound. I remember when I was first meeting one of the project directors who's like, "Oh, are you going to get me to go like all kumbaya, like sit around a fire and go, oh, this is what I'm feeling." I said, well, "No, I mean we can do that if you want to do that. That's definitely an option." And no, for me, it's more about how do we make it so that people can tell you what they think and what they feel in a way where they're not going to have some kind of ramification as a result of whatever that is. That's what we need to focus on. If we can do that, then your team, this project, all of those things will be in a much better place. Because what's really interesting is when I've done quite a lot of reading into emotion expression research, and what I find most fascinating is it doesn't matter what label you give the emotion. What matters is that you express it. So
Mhm.
even if you are angry, but you don't say you're angry. So if I'm angry that, so a really good example. Somebody was meant to have achieved these tasks to allow the next person to go and do their bits of the construction, and they were really angry about the fact that they hadn't done it because they now put them back. So they'd waited for them to, for person A, the person B had waited for person A to do their task, and then that would allow person B to go and do the task that they needed to do next. And that task was on what's called the critical path, which is like if we don't do
Mhm.
this on time, it has big implications further down the road. Um, and I thought they were going to go parental in terms of I'm not angry, I'm just disappointed. And they didn't, which I found quite fascinating. So what they did instead was they said, I feel like you don't respect me enough to do what you needed to do so I could do what I needed to do. And I was like, interesting. So they've gone for respect as a label rather than for anger as a label. So rather than going, I'm angry because you've now made me late, they've gone for, I feel like you don't respect me enough to do what you need to do so that I can do what I need to do. And that was a really great way in. And I was like, no, I do respect you. I do respect you. It's just, okay, but did you tell me that these things are happening? No. So we've got to now when I'm due to begin and you're not ready, and you haven't done anything to manage my expectations, you haven't done anything to communicate this to me, and that doesn't feel like a respectful relationship. So you may respect me, but I don't feel respected right now because of this thing that's happened. And I was like, oh, this is brilliant. I love my work today. This is
Yeah.
great. Um, when I spoke to him afterwards, I was like, he said, I was absolutely fuming. I was so angry, Phil. But I didn't want to say it was anger. And I was like, I don't care. What matters is that you labeled it in some way. And that scans in terms of the wider research on emotional expression is even if you use a different label to what it might like actually be, doesn't
Yeah.
matter. What matters is that you've expressed how you felt rather than him
Yeah.
walking away going, rather than person B walking away
Yeah.
just being annoyed at person A, that
Yeah.
they were able to say something meant that they were able to do something with it and move on.
So what we're saying here is actually the expression is way better than suppression. So
Absolutely.
don't
Yeah,
hold
yeah.
it in. Definitely let it out, but let it out in a way that has meaning for you, even if it doesn't have meaning for anyone else. Because, and I guess then the resolution to that is a way of finding it to have meaning to someone else, but at least getting it out. And I love in that example that you gave there, it was almost this acknowledgement of um I'm feeling angry, I'm going to express it in this way. But what I noticed was interesting to me is that then in the conversation with you, they were saying, Phil, I was furious. I was so angry. And where do you come down on like how we label, like, are we angry or are we feeling angry? Or is that just semantics that we really shouldn't get bogged down in?
Um, so,
Did that
so
question make sense?
no, it does, it
Yeah.
does, it does.
Okay.
So I'm tempted to steal from Brené Brown in terms of so one of the things I love about Brené Brown's work is that she talks about how it might sound like she's advocating for vulnerability without filter. And what she says, that's not what I'm advocating for. I'm not saying that everyone should just be vulnerable all of the time. As soon as you feel some vulnerability, you should just say it, irrespective of the context that you're in. And for me, it's the same and similar with emotion expression. So I think depending on who I was with, I might change the language. So I think the short
Mm.
answer to your question is it probably is semantics, and I would and if I had the awareness to be able to be deliberate with my choice of language, then I would be deliberate with my choice of language. So so one of the things that I speak to some people about is saying if you don't want to label the emotion, label the actual sensation that you are feeling in your body. So if you don't want to say I'm feeling scared, say I'm feeling butterflies in my stomach right now.
Mm.
If that's the sensation that you're experiencing, label that. If you don't want to say, I'm scared by that, you can say, well, that's made me go cold. Oh, I'm feeling quite cold in response to that. That's really made me stop and that's really made me stop and just think, yeah, I don't know, I don't know what to do with that.
Mm.
Which is kind of the freeze response, but labeled in a very somatic way in terms of these are the actual sensations that I'm experiencing, or it could be another one that I've discussed with someone before is I'm finding it really difficult to listen right now because the feelings that I'm feeling are like taking up space in my head, and I'm just finding it really hard to hear what it is that you've got to say because I've got all of these emotions going off in my head. So can we just hold it while I just try and make sense of that, or can we come back to that and can we review it? Because that way you'll if some because in whatever the emotions may be and the labels that somebody may give them, by saying I can't hear you right now because I've got a load of stuff going, I've got a load of feelings going off in my head. That's enough. People will
Mm.
understand what that means, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And depending on and that's where my three favorite words, apart from the ones I say to my wife and children, are context is everything. So depending on who you're with, where you are, what you're intending to do, and so on, will um, can have a big impact or for me anyway, would not have a big impact, would shape how I would approach it.
Mm.
So can I give a slightly different example?
Please do.
So I was speaking at a conference back in October, and the conference was the Business of Training conference. So it was a conference for training companies. So essentially, keep companies like mine and yours, I suppose, in a way, who've come together for an event where they're looking to develop their skills as business owners, or maybe the products or the offerings that their companies have. And I was commissioned to do a session on impact measurement and evaluation and sort of value demonstration. And I was genuinely scared about, like, what have I got to say to this audience? So what can I say to this audience that, like, they haven't heard before? Um, and so my opening to the session was, when I was preparing for today, I was really I was really unsure about how I could. So my session is about adding value, and I was like, well, how the hell am I going to add value to you guys as an audience? So how am I going to add value to you as an audience of, because you're, let's be honest, you're training companies who've got enough money to buy a ticket to this event, which means you must be doing something right. Because otherwise you wouldn't be here, because your business couldn't afford it, or you wouldn't have the money, or you'd be out of business maybe. Um, so how do I deliver value for you when I'm here to talk about delivering value? And you must be okay at it. Otherwise, people wouldn't come back to you. They wouldn't commission you, and you wouldn't get the money that you get. And where I landed was, you've not heard my story. You may have heard other stories. You might have your own stories, but you've not heard my story. And so that's what I'm going to tell you today. I'm going to tell you my story for how I go about demonstrating, measuring impact, and how I go about demonstrating value. And if some of that resonates with you in some way, and there's something you want to steal away. But that was my kind of way in, as acknowledging the fear that I felt, and then trying to own it and frame it in a way that made sense to the audience, but also gave me the freedom to go and give the talk that I wanted to give, if that makes sense.
Yeah,
Because
makes complete sense.
yeah, yeah,
Pasta. Thank you for sharing that. And I think that's the perfect example, isn't it, of, I guess back to the fight and flight, you can run away from the thing that you're
mm,
feeling and the question really that you're struggling to answer, or you just share it. You just own it and send it out there.
yeah.
Yeah, I
And,
love.
and expressing it in a way that I felt was still kind of retained, retained that it retained the authenticity of the emotion, and it also retained my credibility as
Yeah,
a speaker. So it took
yeah,
me a while to get the right frame, but once I got it, I was like, okay, yeah, I think that could
yeah,
work.
yeah.
Um,
And in the context of what you do, it showcases then the work that you do so perfectly, isn't it? That actually I'm going to sit with the way I feel about this, and I'm going to look at it from all angles and figure out how do I use this to my advantage rather than pretend it doesn't happen. So I think that's
yeah,
fantastic. I
thank you.
know that now we are going to start kind of ramping this thing down, but there is one thing that I really want to ask and just get your
Yeah,
opinion,
go.
because I've got strong opinions on this and I really want to hear what yours are. We were talking before about kind of, the acceptable emotions and obviously
Mm,
happy, right? That's one that I don't think many
yeah.
people are ever going to go, no happiness here, thank you. Where do you stand on toxic positivity?
Oh, that's a great question. So, and the way that you framed it tells me that your probably gives me a clue as to your feelings on it. So I think toxic positivity is really dangerous. I think it has the potential to. I mean, for me, if I was going to be, if I was going to try and deconstruct it, so I think if I was to try and give it its most positive intent, what? No, its most constructive intent. What I think toxic positivity is trying to do is it's trying to do that cognitive change or reframe. It's
Hmm.
trying to get you to think about something differently, to feel about something differently. It's also trying to do, or attempting to do, I think, that attentional deployment. So trying to get you to focus on things that are, that might reinforce the particular positive feelings that you want to have. Um, and I think it consciously suppresses, and it subconsciously represses emotions at the same time. Because what toxic positivity tends not to do, which I think is where it's different from something like positive psychology. So I think positive psychology is different from what we might describe as that kind of positivity, approach. Is it almost tries to exclude all of the other emotions, and
Mm.
and that I think is destructive. So even though I use the language, I don't particularly like it in terms of, I don't like the categorization of emotions into positive and negative.
Yeah.
Um, I much prefer to describe the application of emotion in a constructive way or a destructive way. So and this is something that I think might resonate with you and your audience in particular, is happiness as an emotion. I adamantly advocate that happiness can be incredibly destructive. So let me think about a few examples of that. So one would be banter.
Mm.
So banter is a wonderful example of how happiness has the potential to be destructive. So what I mean by that then, destructive is where emotion breaks down relationships and breaks down collaboration. So what banter can do is to create an in and an out group. So if you are in on the banter, then it could be quite constructive because it brings you all together. You feel like you're in it together. You feel a degree of solidarity. You feel a degree of togetherness. But if you are the subject of the banter, you are excluded from that. And therefore, you are less likely to feel the that connection and that bringing together of relationships and yeah, of bringing people together because you might be the subject of that. Or similarly, othering through language or othering through jokes or othering in different ways. Whenever you are, and often that's done through humor, which is to do with happiness. So
Mhm.
that's why I adamantly advocate that happiness can be used in very destructive ways. So if you think that we want everybody to be happy all of the time, I just think that's a really, really destructive and dangerous way to go because it's just not sustainable. In the same way that if you're angry all the time, so interestingly, some people that work in like emergency services, both in the UK and the US, can experience something that's called adrenal fatigue, which is where they are pulling on their adrenaline. They're so kind of angry and scared so often and for so long and with such intensity that their adrenal gland just runs out of adrenaline because they don't have any left. They don't have anything left to give them because they're pulling on it so much. So if you're only angry all the time, your body can't sustain it. And if you're only, so whatever the emotion is, to try and be something all of the time at the exclusion of others
Mhm.
is destructive, both to your relationships and to your health, I would argue.
I love that as a response. That is way more articulate, obviously, because of the nature of your area of expertise than anything I could ever come up with. But I think that's such brilliant framing. And this is a conversation that I find comes up a lot is exactly this. We just want people to be happy. We just need to be kind to each other. And I'm like, well, yes. And you need to be
Yes.
able to have difficult conversations and you need to be able to express how you're feeling about those difficult conversations. And not always is that going to make you feel happy, or you can still do that with kindness. But if kindness is like the default to the exclusion of anything else, we're not accessing that well-rounded range of emotions that we are created.
Mm.
I guess going back to your original points around the way I said physiology and you said a much
Yeah.
better
Oh, I've just been more
psycho something.
psychophysiology. Yeah.
Psychophysics, that's the one. Yeah, so we're not allowing ourselves to be as human can be if we're not having access to all of those things.
Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely. Absolutely.
Phil Willcox. It's been an absolute pleasure to have you along. But before I let you go, is there anything that you came along to say that you haven't had the opportunity to say?
Oh, that's a great question. Um, so I think so. Um, one of the and you've used this metaphor once already, and that was the metaphor of carrying emotion. So one of the things that I will encourage the listeners and all the viewers to do is to think about when they're carrying emotion that either they don't need to carry or isn't theirs to carry. So one thing that I experience regularly in the workplace is a fear from people that if I open up a discussion with my colleagues or open a discussion with my member of my team or somebody about how they're feeling, that I then have to do something with the feelings that they express to me. And what I want to give listeners and viewers is the reassurance that you really don't.
Mhm.
You what you can do, and if I've got a prop, which is my AirPods case for those that are listening. Um, So if I asked you, Katie, how you were feeling, and you told me how you were feeling, and you passed this,
And just to
yeah, there you
there we
go.
go.
Yeah,
We
there you
had, we
go.
had a technical
We had
malfunction
a
because we
technical
got too
mark.
technical with
So
Podscapes.
yeah, see, when I dropped them, I knocked the power cable out of my microphone. Um, is it still there?
I can still hear you.
Still hear me?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, totally. It's all fine.
Okay. Yeah. So when you give me those AirPods case, or give me that AirPods case, um, uh, I don't have to hold on to that. So what I can do is I can put that AirPods case down neatly on my desk and just leave it there, and I can walk away. So when somebody is expressing how they feel to you, one of my favorite questions that you can ask someone is there something that you need from me to help you with that?
Hmm.
And if the answer is no, then great. So often I think when somebody's expressing how they're feeling, we as humans and we're compassionate, empathic beings, we can want to help. And actually, we don't need to. All we need to do is listen and say, is there something that you need from me to help you with that? No, there isn't. Great, thanks, and move on. And then you can just put the feeling down and let it go. You don't need to hold it and take it with you and carry it with you.
Perfect, brilliant advice. Because often as humans, like you say, we go into solution mode as well, don't we? Like, how can I fix this for this person? Like, I have to be the hero of their story.
Yeah.
Not true. Not true. We can just hold space. And I know that that's a word that some people don't agree with or don't enjoy. And there's a really coachy phrase, isn't it? But it's one of my favorites. Just
Mm.
hold space for someone because sometimes that's all we need to express.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. One of my favorite phrases from, I think it's John Kabat-Zinn, who's um, so originally was a American psychologist and then does a lot of work now in and around Buddhism actually. Um, and one of the phrases from his book, which is called "Everywhere You go, there you are," I think,
Mm,
is the greatest gift you can ever give is somebody your undivided attention. And I was like, that's a wonderful
yeah.
phrase. I like that a lot.
Yeah. Because it feels good, doesn't it, when someone's really paying
Mm.
attention, really listening, really present.
As you have been all the way through this recording. So
Thank you very
thank you.
much. Well, likewise, it's been a great chat. And I know that there will be people listening and watching who are going to be like, Phil's brilliant. I need more information about him. I need to get in contact with him. So how can people connect with you, come and find you? What do they need to do?
Thank you. So yeah, they can either find us at emotionatwork.co.uk, or you can find me on LinkedIn. So my parents were obsessed with the letter L. So I'm Phil and then Wilcox with two L's. If I was going to use my proper name, I'm Philip with two L's as well. But you'll find me on LinkedIn as Phil Wilcox with two L's. Um, and then yeah, you can find us on Instagram as well at emotion@_work.
Wonderful. And Emotions at Work is also your podcast, isn't it? So if people have enjoyed listening to this and they want more of these specific conversations that you have with many other people, they can go along. I guess you're available, what, Spotify, Apple?
Yeah. Spotify, through your smart speaker at home, and other places, yes, and Apple Podcasts, and all of those places as well. If in particular you've enjoyed the discussion on the five families of emotion regulation, there is episode 32, which is with a researcher called James Gross, where we take a deeper dive into the five families. And there's also a special edition, I think it's episode 35, that just looks at emotions in particular from a few different ranges and a few different perspectives. So yeah, if you've liked those particular bits, then yeah, head into there.
Amazing. I'm sure people will definitely check that. I will as well. And I'm also incredibly impressed at your encyclopedic catalogue knowledge of the episodes, what you've covered. I wouldn't know where to begin. But Phil Willcox, Wilcox with two L's, Willcox. It has been amazing to have you along talking about this. Thank you so much. I want to check in because we started our call a little bit flat, didn't we? How are we feeling in comparison to where
Yeah,
we kicked off?
yeah,
I feel
feeling good,
better
thank you.
too. Yeah. So
Yeah,
I think we'll take it as a win, shall we? The win conversation.
absolutely. Yeah, definitely.
Awesome.
Thank you so
Phil
much. And
Willcox.
so before you go, I just
Yes.
wanted to say, Katie, thank you so much for your listening. Thank you so much for your attention. And thank you for your wonderful questions as we worked our way through as well. So thank you for being such a wonderful host.
Oh, blimey. Thank you. You can come again.
I'd be delighted.